So hey guys, welcome to part 6 of this very long series of videos. Once again, filmed on a different day, different shirt. So let's kind of get started right away just because I know I still have a couple more films to go over with you guys before I go over to what'll be my next segment, which is going to cover documentaries and TV shows that I've seen over the course of my recovery. So we're actually going to start with a 2021 film here on this part 6 video, and that's The Suicide Squad by James Gunn, the new 2021 reboot of the famous DC comic property. Um, so James Gunn was hired to write and direct this movie after originally getting fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 due to some old offensive tweets that he posted. He has since gotten rehired by Marvel based off of, some apologies and some working out of things and things like that. But around the time that he did originally get fired from Marvel, he got hired by Warner Brothers to do a reboot of the Suicide Squad for them. So this is the new reboot for that. So for my positives and negatives of this movie, it's a lot of fun. It's definitely a film where you can turn it on, just kind of turn your brain off for a little bit, have some fun, watch some things blow up, watch characters do crazy, bizarre things in the spirit of most James Gunn films. Definitely in the spirit of like a Guardians of the Galaxy or Super for those who have seen those films from him before. Definitely a lot of fun to behold while watching the movie. This film definitely has a B movie kind of quality to it. It has definitely kind of a Dirty Dozen meets a Grindhouse feature kind of a feeling to it. It's kind of a hybrid of both of those. So like imagine like the Dirty Dozen and a Grindhouse kind of a movie, and that's what it basically feels like. I think he definitely has set up the tone better than they did in that first Suicide Squad film from David Ayer. I think the B movie vibe that James Gunn went with was a better route to take for a Suicide Squad movie. The fact that the film is rated R, it doesn't hold anything back, definitely adds something to the movie. So the violence can be all out, the blood and gore can be all out. Characters can swear whenever they want, they can say whatever they want. So it definitely goes for that R rating more. While that first Suicide Squad film was PG-13, and they had to hold back on certain things. They could only get away with certain kind of violent moments in that. So it definitely is R rated, which is good. Doesn't hold anything back. Definitely a good quality of this movie. A lot of fun characters are at play here, specifically some characters that we really don't know a lot about with DC Comics. King Shark, who's voiced by Sylvester Stallone, gets a ton of funny things to do here. Ratcatcher number 2 is another character that I really liked here, and kind of the reason why she's called Ratcatcher number 2 has an interesting story behind that. So definitely a lot of fun characters here. Definitely some characters that probably wouldn't show up in something like Batman or Superman or anything like that. They're just a little too bizarre and too obscure probably for those kind of bigger budget films, but the fact that James Gunn was able to get away with it with such a big budget as he did. So for me personally, King Shark and Ratcatcher number 2 were kind of the highlight characters of the story. This is very much, like I said before, a James Gunn property. It isn't afraid to get too bonkers when it needs to be. There's even a character in this film named Weasel he's not in the film for very long, but when he is in the film, definitely feels like something like a Rocket Raccoon or a Groot from the Marvel Universe. Definitely feels like something James Gunn's DNA would be attached to. So very much in the vein of a James Gunn property here, and that definitely works to the film's advantage. And it definitely embraces the weird of the Suicide Squad comic property. But for my negatives of this new Suicide Squad movie, some of the smaller subplots in the film are really not all that interesting. There's one, and it's really not a spoiler. It's just basically the setup of something that happens to a character in this. There's a scenario that Harley Quinn runs into in this, because Margot Robbie returns to the role in this to play Harley Quinn, where she's kind of forced to marry this foreigner that wants to marry her, and they spend a lot of time on it, and there's just certain subplots that the film goes in every once in a while where I just kind of didn't really care about what was going on. And like I said, the whole forced marriage thing that happens with Harley Quinn plays on for a little longer than it should. It really is just trying to make the point that she's still loyal to the Joker. The Joker is her kind of only lover that she could ever imagine herself being with. And the fact that she is so attached to him and so willing to kind of do everything that he says, forcing her into this marriage is just not a good thing to put her in. It just spells out trouble for everything you can imagine. And so really it's trying to make that point, and it spends a lot of time with that. And there's some other subplots along the way, specifically this one, that just spends a little bit more time than they really needed to, and it really didn't need to be in this movie. I also thought there wasn't a lot of personality or development for some of the villain characters. I think one of the villains' names is Tinker, and then the other guy's name is Starro, and he's like this big starfish character. They really don't set up the villains too much. They're just kind of there for the Suicide Squad to stop at one point in the movie. I really would have liked to see more personality or more development for the villains rather than just bad guys being bad guys, and now the Suicide Squad, who are already bad guys, have to go out and stop them. So I thought that aspect was kind of lame. There is some confusing edits throughout the movie too as to who's alive and who's dead. The film isn't afraid to kill off characters too, just to let you know. And I'm not really not trying to give away any spoilers. I'm just trying to let you know that there are characters in this film that don't survive the movie, so don't get too attached to anybody. And so as a result, James Gunn wants to use some of those characters again in later scenes. And so there's scenes where it's unclear if it's a scene that happens before the opening of the movie, and there's scenes where you can tell James Gunn wanted to use those characters again, so he just kind of plops them in there and hopes that you forgot that they got killed at an earlier point in the movie. So I don't know if James Gunn is trying to do a non-linear story at some points in this movie, because at certain points it's just like, well, wait, that character got killed, that character's not in the movie anymore, that character died in that one place from earlier, and how come they're showing up still in these other places and this later point in the movie. So I thought from an editing perspective, some of the editing choices were a little confusing as to who's alive and who's dead throughout the movie. And I thought that aspect could have been better because it's kind of confusing to watch on a first viewing of this movie. Certain characters get more background details than other ones do. And for some of them too, like we don't really know some of these characters all that well from earlier DC properties. Some of them are just there for laughs. Some of them are just there to kind of be weird. So I thought certain characters get better background details than others. So I thought that aspect of the film was disappointing because we care about these certain characters that do get a lot of development, and then that the characters that don't, we're really not giving a lot of reason to care about them. And some of these, subpar off to the side characters that don't get any development, there's really not a lot going for them for us to care about them, where they do live or die in the movie. So I thought that aspect of the film could have been better written on and better directed. I also thought some of the marketing and the trailers gave away certain really good moments in the movie. Some of these could have been really, really funny moments on a first viewing, but because the trailer gave away so much, some of those laughs and some of those really good moments are kind of taken away from us as a result, just because the marketing and the trailers kind of gave away some of those really good moments before we even watched the film. So I thought that aspect of the film could have been better, and I thought maybe James Gunn could have had more of a voice in the marketing of the movie. So I would give the new Suicide Squad film, the 2021 reboot, at 8.5 out of 10. The next film I saw throughout my recovery is an old film from the 80s, from 1988 exactly, called Midnight Run. I believe the director of this film has also worked on some other action films in the past as well. So for Midnight Run, basically, long story short, there's this well-known cop. He can kind of track down any criminal that needs to be kind of put behind bars. So he has to go and get this accountant that's kind of been in part of this embezzlement case. And so basically, this guy's long overdue for some jail time. And so Robert De Niro's character arrests the Charles Gordon's character, who's this guy who's in trouble with this embezzlement case. And so he brings him back, but he comes into all different kind of scenarios that kind of get them in trouble and make it hard for them to kind of get back into, getting this guy behind bars and everything like that. So basically, over the course of the film, he has to figure out how to get this guy behind bars, still get his money, and make sure that this guy kind of gets the prison time that he finally needs to have. But for my positive negatives of Midnight Run, the oddball pairing of Robert De Niro and Charles Gordon I thought was very entertaining. They had good chemistry. The jokes worked off of well of each other. There's even certain scenarios where Robert De Niro is kind of in a life or death situation, and Charles Gordon will only save him if he promises to either limit his jail time or to not bring him to prison at all. So there's certain choices throughout the film that kind of makes things interesting, and how De Niro doesn't live up to the promise, or how Gordon doesn't live up to his promise. So I thought that aspect of the film was very interesting. The film does pick up in its humor and its action towards the second half of the story. It does kind of take us a long time to get to those action scenes and to get to those more humorous moments, because there is kind of a clashing of tones in the first half of the film. But I do feel when we do get to the second half and the humor and the action start to pick up, that's when the film really starts to take flight. There's a lot of scenes too where they travel to numerous different places throughout the U.S., and this puts our two lead characters in the different kind of scenarios that make things interesting that they probably wouldn't face in a city or a desert or things of that nature. So I thought that aspect of the film of going from different place to different place in the U.S., running into different kind of scenarios that are kind of troublesome, was very interesting to behold in this movie. But for my negatives of Midnight Run, it does take a very long time to get going. Like I mentioned earlier, the film doesn't really truly pick up until the second half of the story. It just takes a very long time to get going. There really is almost no jokes at all for the good solid first 45 minutes of the movie. I think this film almost runs for a good solid 2 hours, I want to say. So it really does kind of take a long time to get going. That's really disappointing. There's also almost no action scenes at all until the first hour of the movie, so I thought that aspect of the film was disappointing, specifically the fact that this is an action comedy kind of a movie. There's also a lot of moments that I thought would have been prevented if this one scenario didn't happen with Charles Grodin on a plane. I thought so many scenarios of the film just could have been avoided and could have been prevented if Charles Grodin's character was just more cooperative on this plane ride at one point in the movie. And then once you kind of link back to the fact that that's kind of how the film played out based on this one mistake, it really kind of frustrates you as a viewer just because the writing probably could have been smoother if this one scenario just didn't happen at all. I also thought the comedy action didn't quite blend well together the way that they should have, because like I said, this does feel like it's trying to be an action comedy, and I'm sure that it is, but sometimes that comedy and the action just don't blend very well together. It's either too dark in its action scenes to be funny, or just not funny enough in the action for it to be loved as a comedy either, so there is kind of a clashing of tones here, unfortunately. There's also just not very many memorable jokes here. There's just a couple of chuckles every once in a while, but nothing that really will get you rolling on the floor laughing in this movie. There's also just not very many likable characters in the runtime either. Everybody's either a jerk or uncooperative or swears all the time, and there's just so many things that happen throughout the movie that I just didn't feel myself too invested in these characters overall. I also thought the use of profanity just kind of got exhausting after a while. Yeah, it's R-rated. Yeah, you want to make the point that De Niro's a tough guy in this and everything, but I'm usually not the person that complains about that kind of stuff, but the fact that this did feel so exhausting in the profanity department really just kind of got old after a while. This film also tries to be Lethal Weapon and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles at the same time, and to be honest, it doesn't really pull off either vibe very well. If it wants to be Lethal Weapon, there needs to be more pedal to the metal action scenes with funnier jokes. And if it wants to be Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, it really has to hit the ground running in the humor department. And like I said, it just takes so long for the humor to finally pick up. So if it's trying to be both films, it doesn't work. And if it's trying to be both films at the same time, then it really, really doesn't work very well. But I'm still going to give Midnight Run a 7 out of 10. There are certain things to like in this film. It's just not quite the masterpiece you might have heard about over time. Then for the last film in this part of the video, and then I'll probably continue for the rest in part 7, I saw the new David Lowery film, A Ghost Story. He did Pete's Dragon, the remake, the live-action one from 2016, which I really enjoyed. He also did a film with Robert Redford a couple of years ago that I really enjoyed called The Old Man and the Gun, which is based off a true story. But in A Ghost Story, basically it's this man, he gets into a car accident, and we basically see kind of what he sees in the afterlife. We kind of get to see all the things that he's seeing as a ghost in the afterlife. So basically that's what the film is. So from my positives and negatives of this film, there's a couple of nice art house shots throughout the movie. You can definitely tell they spent a lot of time figuring out the choreography and what would be a nice shot and what would be a not so nice shot. The film's message of the importance of leaving your mark in the world when you're alive and how tragic it can be when that long-term goal isn't met or never gets achieved at all, and kind of the tragedy behind that. For my negatives, though, there is a lot of long and dull sequences here. Like, for example, there's a scene where Rooney Mara eats an entire pie in one scene, no cuts at all. We get to see her eat the entire pie in that one scene. There's a lot of scenes with the ghosts that Casey Affleck is. He's like this guy with a bedsheet over his face. staring at walls in a room for long periods of time, and it really doesn't work. The film's statements on the paranormal and the dead range from either really pointless or to really obvious ones. We don't get a lot of time to get attached to the lead characters of the story. Just this accident happens right away to this guy, and we're just kind of expected to be attached to him somehow. And the film just gets a little too odd to be viewed as intriguing. There's just, the obvious bedsheet thing over Casey Affleck's body. He's supposed to be a ghost. Well, duh. The ghost subtitled interactions. Yeah, there's a scene where a ghost and another ghost at a different house interact with each other, and it's done with subtitles, and it's really kind of lame, to be honest. And that there's just so many absences of actions from the ghost. There's just them standing around or them staring at stuff throughout the movie. It's just not a very interesting movie. I would give Ghost Story a 6 out of 10. You could probably avoid that one. So I will see you guys back here for part 6 for more films that I saw during my recovery.